and welcome to the quest for the good life with Dr. Mike Strouse, the fearless Indiana Jones of Good Life Innovations. We also have today a luminous constellation of guests. We've got the great McKinney Todd. She is, of course, the Good Life legend and executive director of Good Life University. We've got David McDonald, our director of technology, the great Wizard of Oz, pulling the strings from behind the digital curtain. And we've got Abby Baden for the first time, and we don't know who her favorite character is. I should mention that Megan's character is the always adventurous and exuberant Joe Marsh from Little Women, fiercely independent and resourceful.
I love that you
Abby,
remembered that, Ivo. That's wonderful.
And that she is.
yes, and we don't know who's Abby's favorite character
Well,
is.
you might want to let Abby know, Evo, what we're doing with this. I mean, what we're asking her to do.
Yeah, seriously. By the way, Abby is a director of Johnson County Neighborhood Network and Safety Net. And we will try to explain to you exactly what we're doing here. It's a tradition, it's our little ritual on this podcast. Every guest has to pick up their favorite character, fictional character. Could be a movie, could be a TV show, could be a book character. But we're looking for a protagonist that describes the best who you are. So if you have a character like this, please enlighten us.
So the good thing is I listened to the podcast, so I was prepared. I
All
came
right,
prepared
good.
today. So I actually talked about it with Yolanda, and we discovered that Elastigirl, so Mrs. Incredible from The Incredibles, is my go-to. Yeah, because I am all over the place all the time, team player, covering things, fixing things, whatever it may be, just like the
So
Elastic.
you're flexible.
Yes, yes, and adaptable.
In one word, flexible, great crisis management. I've seen it firsthand. Yes, and so we are planning on a longer episode today because of the gravity of the problem we discussed in our last session, namely the privacy paradox. This kind of a conundrum of seeking privacy while relying on intrusive methods continues to burden the industry. And today we want to dive deeper into the problem with Dr. Strauss and some of the people who are responsible with coming with solutions to the problem. So that this is where we are today.
Very good, Evo. And we're going to have a lot of fun today. This could be, and you never know how we start out and how we finish, but this could be three podcasts that we're going to have to separate here because this is going to be heavy. And it's important. The whole focus of today is our greatest quest, and that is going to be, and I am going to have to figure out how in the world to go through this because this is the first time in a podcast where we're actually going to have kind of a presentation behind us that's going to kind of instill the discussion. But this is what we're going to cover. And I don't think we're going to get it all done in one podcast. It's going to take a couple, maybe 2 or 3 podcasts. But we're really covering, the privacy paradox. We did cover a little bit, but we're going to revisit that. And we're going to talk about, our just what our greatest goals are for our quest for best practice care. We're going to talk about the least intrusive approach that achieves these outcomes. We're going to talk about something that people don't even know exists. This is a first ever discussion of this, and that's kind of a hierarchy for selecting the methods of supporting people to live an independent life. It's
Yeah.
going to be a fun, and then we'll end up talking about, the neighborhood network is why we have Abby in, and policies and procedures, licensing, reimbursement practices that sort of could help us or can hurt us getting to that next generation of care. And so it's going to be a lot of fun. But if you stay with us, guys, here's what's going to happen. We're going to seriously figure out how we can get more progress together towards what we believe to be our goals of improving the lives of people that we're trying to support. And, we're all about the quest for the good life. It's what they call a BHAG. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal that we've been in hot pursuit of for 50 years as a company. But really, this pursuit is doggedly increasing, and we're making some great headway, but we're going to need some help. So, let's kind of revisit what the privacy paradox is. And this was covered under another section, another podcast. And if you haven't watched it, I'm really recommending you go back and watch it because it was a pretty cool podcast.
Yeah.
And it was a great discussion. But the privacy paradox is the reality that in our attempt to protect privacy, we've really restricted or dismantled less intrusive and more effective approaches to care that could make meaningful advances on all of our care outcomes, including privacy. So our protections on privacy has harmed our ability to, ironically, improve privacy. So this is a big, weird situation we're in, and you're going to understand it as we get through this. But our beacon, the most important thing that we need to keep our focus on, is our federal responsibility is to use the least intrusive approach that can deliver the most important expected care outcomes. So if our quest is to improve the lives of people to live independently, and that's our primary goal, but we're going to talk about what our goals are. If that's our quest, our goal is to do that in a way that can achieve it in the least intrusive way possible. That's what we're doing. And I will tell you, there is a spoiler alert, because we're going to end up talking about a bewitching solution, and you're going to know why I call it bewitched in a little bit. But it's a bewitching solution called the Neighborhood Network that delivers on-demand, in-person, and remote, and assisted living services when and where needed as an amenity of a neighborhood. Now, we've talked about that a lot. We've talked about blue zones. We've talked about all kinds of fun stuff. But that's what we're going to end up talking about. But important to get there, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of other things, and that's what we're about ready to get into. So today we're going to cover our goals for helping people live a good life. What are the goals? Can we agree on them? Because I think the reason we're not making great progress in our efforts to help people live independent, good lives is because we may not agree on the goals that we're to achieve. In fact, I would tell you the biggest barriers I have found on our ability to help people live better lives, quite frankly, is ourselves. It's our own industry's making. We're getting in our way. And that's a big statement to say, but I believe we are. And we need to kind of get out of our way so we can make some more progress. And we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about the goals. We're going to talk about how do you select the best and least invasive way to deliver support. How do you select that? We're going to talk about a hierarchy that we can use for selecting the least intrusive approach to care and how we follow that. And if we can do that, then everybody's going to have some better guidance on how you pick the approach to care. How do you do that in a way that you pick the least intrusive way that's going to achieve our goals? And then we're going to talk about policies and funding and stuff like that that people are going to want to tune in about. So, let's start by talking about what are our greatest expected outcomes of support. Like when we're trying to support somebody to live a good life, what are they? And I have to tell you, if you are a student of law, historic landmark legal decisions and the lawsuits that shaped our field, the Willowbrooks of the world, and all of the stuff you'll see right, in the screen behind me, guys. These are the things that have generated what really are our goals. And if you see them, and look, there are more goals than these, but these are kind of the highest level of goals. And, you know, what are the goals that we want to look at to keep us on the right path to deliver and keep creating best practice care and support? If we're on a quest to do something better, we're trying to deliver better services, what are our goals? And if we can't agree on the goals, then as a nation, we're not going to get to the, you know, we're not going to get to the destination. We're not, and we're going to just keep running around in circles. You know, you can't make any trip unless you have a plan, and to have a plan, you got to have a destination, and the destination in this case are our goals. So here's the short list, and it's to help people live as independently as possible. Would you guys agree that that's a massive goal of what we're trying to do?
Number
we
one.
Want people, I think it's number one, personally. Yeah. And I think we get confused by that, you know, but I think independence, and we're going to talk about what that means, and the second one is empowering greater self-direction, autonomy, self-government. I mean, you know, we want to be in control of our lives. We want other people to feel like they're in control of their lives. Third, we want to provide access and accommodations for helping people live a normal life. And, you know, news for you guys, sometimes those accommodations don't look normal, but they're actually there so people can be normal, right? And so it's important. Yeah. Another goal all through time is personal safety. Personal safety. I mean, our job is not only to help people live a good life, but that they feel safe and secure. We have a lot of discussion. People need to feel safe and secure so that they can, so they can be happy and so they can, take risks. You know, if you're worried about your personal safety, that makes it really challenging. And then the last one is privacy. I mean, we have an obligation as an agency to protect people's privacy. People want to protect their own privacy. You know, later we're going to even talk about like who owns your privacy. Well, you know, the truth of the matter is you own your own privacy, but our job as an agency is to protect it. So that's another goal of delivering services. So there's probably more, but if you look at the at the big picture, these 5 goals are pretty important to deliver services, and I want to dive into them a little bit more. You know, we think about independence, and Dave, I don't know what you think about independence, but it really isn't just about, not needing help. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about, oh, if you're independent, you can't have any help. Independence is really, it means having control and a choice of your life and making your own decisions and living with the same freedom as everybody else, regardless of disability or age. It's truly a philosophy. It's a belief. It's being in charge of yourself. So there's some key points of that: self-determination, not doing everything alone. You're not. We want to determine our own destiny. We want to have a say over our life. That's what we mean by living independently. There's a lot to be said of this. Do you know what organic decisions are? Have you ever heard of the term organic decisions?
Was it naturally occurring?
Yeah. It is like every day and every moment you have ability to decide, and quite frankly, even redecide of that. The freedom, ability to access and pursue your goals. You have to have access, accessibility. You hear those words. You want purpose. You want to have a life of purpose. You want safety in in your own home and in your own community. Feeling fully participating in the community. Let's kind of keep going deeper into this, and then we're going to get into, because again, before we get into the how we do this, I really want to make sure we agree on the what, and that's what we're really talking about. So living independently, and underneath that is empowering greater self-direction, autonomy, self-governance. Those are big words. But when you think of self-direction, guys, what do you think about, like self-direction?
I think about somebody. I think about somebody picking up a phone themselves. I think about somebody being in charge of what they're doing.
Yeah, somebody actually controlling it. Like Dave, you're the Wizard of Oz with all the things that you pull. You want to pull those things for your life. You want to make sure that
Correct.
you're the one that determines like your life as much as
think this is
possible. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this is a little bit of like an industry specific term that we're very familiar with in like the intellectual and developmental disability space. But coming from the outside in, I didn't know what self direction was. So it was a term that was, pretty specific to IDD. But when you pair it actually with autonomy, self governance, the essence of it, I guess I will say, really becomes clear with that context. So to me now, however many years in the industry, it means a little something different, and it's at the core of being able to choose. And I like what you said earlier about organic choice. This is the core of that, being able to grab your own decision making in the moment and actuate it upon and within your life.
So organic choice we'll get into, but organic choice is that way you wake up every day and you decide how you're gonna. In care, it's like, how do I want this need met?
Exactly.
Or what do I want to do today? Or it's having that choice at the moment. And you know what? You may decide something different today than you would tomorrow. The same thing.
And it's
organic
the core
choice.
Freedom. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a freedom to choose and re-choose how you do something, when you do it. Change your mind. I've got a bad hair day, so I'm going to be remote, or I don't want to travel, or whatever it is. But this person is really important to meet in person, so I'm going to go in person. So it's that ability to make these choices organically, and not have one choice like made at one time that affects, like, I only do it this way. How many people do that? Like, say, I only want to do this way.
And I view it as like you're in the driver's seat of your life, the journey of your life, where you're able to drive where you want, when you want.
For granted, I don't want us to take for granted that we're advocating for people to have those same ability. Like, if any marginalized community, it doesn't matter. It's like, it's the human dignity. And you mentioned earlier, like, having the dignity of risk. At the core of that is getting to choose for oneself. Yeah.
And so, this is where the Bewitched part comes in. Literally imagine from a care perspective. Self-government is, in my mind, you need to know when does the support start? What support do you want? How long do you need it? When does it go away? Are you all too young even to remember Bewitched?
I remember Samantha.
Still Bewitched.
Samantha and Darren, right?
Oh
I
yeah.
don't know it very well.
Oh my, you missed it because number one, she was hot. I'm just saying, she was hot. And secondly, she was a witch. She was a good witch. But the thing is, she would, instead of snapping your fingers, she would twinkle her twitch her nose. Right, that was it. But I'm better at snapping my fingers, but if I was getting care and could envision the best method possible, it was like how Samantha would do it. It was Bewitched. It's like, when I want care, I want to snap my fingers, I want it there. I want to decide what care I get. I don't, like, I want to decide right now I want remote care, or I want in-person care, or I want a nurse, or I need help from a counselor, or whatever, whatever you need. Wouldn't it be amazing? Wouldn't it be amazing if you could snap your fingers and get it exactly when you want it, where you want it, and for as long as you want it? When you were done, it went away. Because if you could do that, can you imagine how that would advance independence, self-government, your personal safety? You could have, help come when you need, you're confused about how to use a piece of equipment that could be unsafe or whatever, or that you're lost, for example. You're lost, you're out for a walk and you don't remember, as a care need, you don't remember where you are and you need help. So you snap your fingers and you get it. But when it's over, out you go. I'm done. I want to live my life. I don't want my life hijacked into somebody else's, care store.
Absolutely.
I want to just get it when I need it, where I need it, and I want it not interfering with my life at all. I want it expanding it, and then I want it out, right? So traditional services, would you guys admit, traditional services, in-home services, they don't work that way.
No, it sounds kind of magical. It's sort of fantastical, right? Like,
It does.
It's the when, where, how, and how long. Getting an instant.
exactly,
That
exactly.
But you know what? Would you also agree that that would be the goal if you could do it?
Absolutely.
Of course. Who wouldn't
So
want that?
would you agree that if you could do it, that would be better than traditional care?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And it would absolutely advance what were one of these goals, or more of them, right? The autonomy.
Right. So
the
those
person-centeredness.
those 5 or 6 things that we said were important. This
Absolutely.
would probably that magical way of asking for it to come, getting the right care that you need, having it be there for as long as you want, and then going away wherever you need it. Right. That would be the best way to advance all of the goals. And would it improve privacy as well?
Checks all those boxes.
Yeah.
Everything. So all I'm trying to say is when you have those goals and you can dream, that would be how I would fix it. I would go back to 1970, whenever, and I'd ask Samantha to make me a witch, and I would just do that, and I'd be able to do it. So I want you to keep that in mind, because in all truth, that's what we set out to do, right? Abby?
Yep.
That's the
true.
whole point.
Yep.
About what we tried to do. And it should be true that if you did that, and whatever you needed to do, make that magic happen, and if it improved all of those outcomes more than traditional care, it should be unquestionable that would be a better approach to care. It would be less intrusive, and it would advance everything that we did better than anything else. And there shouldn't be anybody getting in the way of that, right?
Correct.
That's what I think. So I want you to keep that in mind. So providing access and accommodations, there are many ways that with a person with disabilities or a senior or somebody who needs care, we all agree that in order to live a normal life, you might need things that normal, typical populations don't need. I don't need a cane, but a cane is necessary for some people to live a normal life, right? It may not look normal, but it's still needed to live the normal life. A wheelchair may be the same thing. So it could be physical, it could be technological supports that you need. Sort of enabling technologies may not even be normal in appearance, but it may help you be able to live and access a normal life. Communication, augmentative communication, environmental and housing. I got to tell you, man, housing is such a issue for accommodations and needs. And Abby, it's not only accessible housing. There's all decent housing require leases, and every landlord I've ever met requires you to financially qualify for that lease. Well, for a fact, most everybody that we serve would not on their own qualify for that lease. Somebody has to step up and guarantee it. That's an accommodation.
Absolutely.
That's an accommodation. And that gave them access to a better place to live. I actually dealt with a regulatory issue where they said everybody has to have a lease on their own. And I'm sitting there going, well, if that's the standard, then they're going to have to live in substandard housing because that's the only lease they're going to be able to afford.
Correct.
And is that a decent goal? That's kind of an example where a regulation could get in the way of somebody having a good life, right? So, and that happens just all the time in regulations. But the largest barrier, I'm going to tell you, to living individual lives in somebody's own home or in small homes in inclusive neighborhoods is staff. That not having access to good, reliable, well-supported, direct support professionals is probably the number one thing that's going to prevent somebody from living a good life. I mean, But can you imagine in traditional care, you know, some of those issues of that, you know, we've researched that for years, you know, this, as the setting size gets smaller, the care ratios get higher. So it consumes more staff. It also, research has shown that small settings have more part-time than large settings, and part-time has twice the turnover. It has twice, you know, it has twice the openings. The openings are open longer. So if you're the only one DSP working to support somebody in a home and you don't know them, it's very challenging to meet complex care needs. There's just so many of these obstacles that cause care gaps for people or knowledge gaps that people can't support somebody. And then all of a sudden, if that's true, can you imagine how many people are not served in individual homes? They may have a complex care need that they just can't live with that kind of turbulence. And pretty soon the reality is they don't feel safe there. You know, so of all those 6 things we looked at, privacy, independence, those boxes, even though they're in a small setting, it can't be checked, and they end up in congregate care because that's the only place they feel like they can be safely served. So if we want to serve people in small, inclusive settings and serve people who have complex care needs, we have to figure out a way to deliver very effective, stable, well-supported staff. If we don't do that, we're never going to achieve that goal. And that's, you know, so that's really important. Personal safety, you know, federally, the most important thing is they have to be free from abuse, neglect, exploitation. That's like number one. We have to make sure that they are safe that way. But there's a lot of other things about safety that we all feel, right? I mean, you know, how many of us have home security systems? How many of us, you know, want to live in a decent neighborhood that isn't one that is scary? You know, life safety protections. You know, what if you had fall challenges? You know, you want to feel like you have some safety to prevent or deal with issues of fall. Or what if you have an intermittent, you know, behavioral problem where you have, you know, or memory problems or elopement or self-harm or aggression or any of another things. These are all things that will not only affect your own personal safety, but those of other people that could get you, even as at the worst case scenario, it can get you in criminal justice system and other kinds of things. So, you know, we have such an obligation as a caregiver to deliver services in ways that provide personal safety, and it's one of our most important responsibilities. Because if you can't make somebody safe, then that's the number one reason why people feel like they need to move to a more congregate setting, you know, for support, if they just don't feel like they can safely be served, not just adequately, but safety. And kind of here's the one that's under the national spotlight a lot, especially any program that works in the area of technology. It's the area of privacy. But, you know, I wanted to spend a few minutes here and diving into this expectation, because sometimes I don't know if people know what privacy really means from a regulatory perspective. At the top level, and this is CMS's viewpoint, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, privacy is an invasion of privacy is an unwelcome, uninvited intrusion into one's private space. It really is. A privacy intrusion occurs when their private area is intruded upon by a person, a DSP, a person served. It's not just us. It could be, you know, another person served going into somebody's private space in their bedroom, unwelcomed, or a private party, in person. It could be virtual. It could be in person, who isn't invited or who is unknown to exist. That's where, you know, some things in technology exist. You know, it is an invasion of privacy if somebody is involved and we didn't know that they were involved. That's considered an invasion of privacy. So the CMS expects that people who receive support should have privacy. Remember these words: in all areas where privacy is reasonably expected. That's the term that they use in all areas where privacy is reasonably expected. And persons served have the right to receive effective care and support as privately as possible. Now, look, ultimate privacy would, all in care, I'll just say all the care is intrusive. There isn't any care that you could give to somebody that isn't intrusive. But if it's welcome and invited, it's not, it may be invasive, but it's not a breach of privacy. I give an example. If somebody needs help with a shower, that's pretty, personal stuff. You get to see somebody's body, as a shower. It's invasive, but if the person needs help and they've asked for it and they are welcoming the help, it's not an invasion of privacy, even though it's intrusive. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And some things are more intrusive, than others. But all care, there isn't any care that's not, intrusive to some degree. They all vary in level of intrusive, and that's going to be what we really will focus on, later. But there are some things like, classrooms, preschools, even in hospitals, common areas of hospitals, common areas in nursing homes. No privacy, by the way, is expected in those areas. Literally, that's where you see, like, in almost every hospital you go to in the common areas, or even where the nurse's station is, or in the various, common areas of the hospital, they'll all have, cameras for security, those sorts of things. You have, all there's, like, if you're looking at normal security where you would have a camera on the outside of a house, or you can stand in the public area, Dave, and look at any area that you want. There is no expectation of privacy in that. But one of the things I will tell you is, as homes and care, programs get smaller, the smaller a home is, the greater the possibility is of privacy and the greater expectation there is of privacy. But when you get into congregate care, there may be private areas within congregate care, somebody's bedroom, their bathroom, some private areas that they've designated. But the common area is not an area where there's an expectation of privacy. So I think that things to know that there's all kinds of things about privacy. There's like, is there an expectation that it should be private is the first thing you need to decide. And there should be, in every home and in every residential facility, congregate care, you must provide areas where it is private for people. But in small homes, there's a greater expectation of privacy because there's a greater ability to be private in smaller homes. But another issue that I really wanted to focus before we moved on about privacy is, just in case support, whether it's virtual or in person, or even software or sensor-based support, when it isn't needed. Underline the words, when it isn't needed, or for people who don't require that level of support or oversight, can be considered surveillance. A lot of people think, Dave, that surveillance is only for remote monitoring, or technology is surveillance. But surveillance existed before technology, and it was people who did it. And,
Correct.
And, virtually, or people who are monitoring somebody, if they don't need it, is just as invasive as if you're doing it remotely and they don't need it. There's no difference there. They're still being surveilled by people who are sitting there looking for needs that don't even exist, and if they're not welcome, that is even a bigger issue. So it doesn't matter whether it's in person or remotely, virtually, or by sensors. If you're doing monitoring of people when they don't require it for care, it could be considered surveillance, whether it's in person or any of those other methods. And so privacy is, all the rules about privacy existed before technology. People don't remember that, but they all existed before that. So you have to be mindful that they apply to everything. There is no free pass on the rules for privacy. And our obligation is to make sure that our oversight's needed, the support is needed, and if we're just there because we want to be and we're not welcome, and that word is really important. People have to be welcomed. If I receiving support and I'm not welcoming the support and I don't need it, then the reality is it's an invasion of privacy.
You had
Regardless of
mentioned
the method.
you had mentioned like the smaller settings too, like in a home where privacy has to even be more restricted. I always look at the concept of somebody sitting on a couch that's there for one function. They look over to the right. They look in a bedroom. Did they just breach the privacy because they looked into someone's bedroom?
Yeah. And you in traditional care we get into it, but you can't control what they see, what they do, where they
Right.
go. I mean, literally, they are a moving target for that. You can ask them to abide by that, but you don't really know.
There's
on
a
that.
layer too, I think, of that goes on with what you talked about just the slide before, where if personal safety is part of the goal of the care, then you're talking about individuals surveilling, I suppose, by following an individual into even their private areas. So you
Yeah.
don't just get to take a pass on where somebody might be to help you observe a need and be ready to accommodate it, which inherently does feel like an invasion of privacy.
And
It
to your
is,
point,
yeah.
you lose independence as well at that point
Absolutely.
right away.
Yep.
All these expectations, when you get into congregate care, you have to admit it is so much harder to provide a high level of privacy than if you're in a small home. You can. So privacy is probably easier to abide with in a small home, but also other things could be more challenging, and we're going to get to that in a minute. So I wanted to go through these goals, about self-direction, autonomy, self-governance, living independently, personal safety, access, privacy. These are all really important goals. So it isn't just our only goal isn't privacy, and all care is intrusive. Our goal is to use the least intrusive approach that is necessary to achieve as many of those outcomes as is possible, to as much of it as we can do. That's what we're supposed to do. And I would have to say, in all seriousness, this is the beacon, this is the overriding goal of all goals. Because if you follow this one, we're going to do everything we can to elevate everybody's life as much as possible while being mindful about how do we do that in a way that is the least disruptive possible, right?
Yeah.
So all those outcomes, I hope we agree, at least as a nation, that those outcomes we talked about are like, if they're they're the most important. Maybe there's others that could be important too, but that's what we're supposed to do.
That's
That's
pretty they're foundational for sure.
They are
Well, and they're
foundational.
bound by our regulations, so they're based on what we are sort of officially required to provide.
Yeah, and those came from have underpinnings in legal actions that were class action, suits that generated civil rights fundamentally for people that we support. So it really has, we know what we're supposed to do, or we should know what we're supposed to do, and none of those goals like trump another one. Like privacy. If all we focused on was privacy, then what about the others?
Yeah.
What about the others? And so it's balancing. That's what this whole idea of the least intrusive approach is, trying to pick the strategy that advances all of them as the best we can and balances care against intrusion. All care is intrusion, but it has to be balanced. Like, what are we getting for that care? What outcomes are we achieving, and is it worth it, right? So we have two tests that we have to do. We want the least intrusive method possible that can effectively deliver or advance the required expectations. Would you agree, though, from a policy and regulatory perspective, in all truth, it should be inappropriate to promote more intrusive methods of care over less intrusive ones that may be just as effective in delivering the care outcomes. It would be not appropriate.
Yeah.
It would be inappropriate to implement policies that would steer people away from less intrusive approaches. Would you agree with that?
It's absolutely logical. It's absolutely logical.
So if there were regulations and policies and everything that steered you towards more, let's say it steered you towards congregate care, or it steered you towards other more intrusive approaches, then there would be a flaw in those regulations. They need to be revisited, in my opinion.
Not at the risk of everything we just talked about, but if you're going to actually, I guess, abide by our policy and regulatory requirements, we have to pick the least intrusive approach to care that still meets the care outcomes that are required.
And from a regulatory perspective, I would like to be held to that standard. That their job should be to hold us to the standard of using the least intrusive approach.
Yeah.
And to not put in regulations that actually work against those outcomes. That's the way I look at it, but let's see how it plays out. So the right approach to care, and I'll tell you, if you look at history, especially in the medical field, guys, you'll see the creation of what I call intrusion hierarchies or care hierarchies. For example, over time there's evidence that a body of evidence. It could be studies, it could be clinical practice that says this approach is reliably less intrusive and as or more effective than the other approach. And if you find that's reliably true, then there's a hierarchy that says, oh, this is less intrusive than that one, so we should use this one first. I'll give you an example. Angioplasty, right? Open heart surgery used to be the only thing that you could do to fix a leaking heart valve. But then angioplasty came along, and it was I always say it was a camera on a stick, but it used camera technology. It used remote support technology and smart technologies all wrapped together. It was the same doctor that did really the same doctor did it. It was, instead of doing the manual open heart surgery, those doctors that did heart surgery were retrained, to use technology. And once they mastered angioplasty, the total game changed. The recovery time, the success rate, the mortality rates, everything the evidence said, angioplasty was less intrusive than open heart surgery. And then you couldn't even choose it as a patient if you couldn't choose open heart surgery if angioplasty could be performed as effectively or reasonably effectively.
And
so
that's
a choice.
And that's a perfect example. Even if somebody could have the choice of those two situations, I don't know anybody who wouldn't take the angioplasty.
You wouldn't think. There would be very few, and I'm sure they would, but can you imagine the scenario where, somebody regulating angioplasty so that it would be harder to pick than open heart surgery? That just wouldn't happen in the medical field, would it?
Well, you can't use angioplasty because it's got a camera attached to it. So,
Right.
Well,
you have to go.
Could be a perfect example, but
Right.
and that's an example where they didn't look at the outcomes. They looked at component parts of it and said because it uses parts, even though it's less intrusive, you can't use it. Now, that's not true in angioplasty, but
Right.
you might remember that example because we're going to get to it later. So there are other things like behavioral interventions. I'm a behavioral analyst by training, not practicing for years, but except on organizational things. But there are many behavioral interventions that exist in a hierarchy of restrictiveness, and we, as a practitioner of behavioral, clinical work, you're required to use less restrictive methods before you would ever consider more restrictive. It's just how the health medical field and science works, and they eventually produce hierarchies. Now, the next thing though is new approaches, sometimes the hierarchies aren't clear. Like, if a new invention comes along, it may be less clear where it fits in the hierarchy, or it may not be, arguably better than another approach yet because we don't have enough science behind it. Does that make sense? So its effectiveness isn't maybe as known, or it's intrusive, it may be not as known, or it just hadn't been used long enough to get this body of evidence. In that case, those hierarchies don't exist. And when that's the case, you have to carefully compare the outcomes produced in the intrusiveness of the new approach to the old ones. So when you don't really know where it fits in the hierarchy, the process is always the same. It's looking at the outcomes of it and comparing that against the other approaches that would be used if you didn't use that one. And then deciding in that comparison which is better on that one. And if it's less clear, then this is where personal choice comes in. Well, you could use this one, and here we think are the advantages, or you could use that one. We're not sure which one is, going to be the absolute best, but which one would you prefer? I mean, that personal choice goes up when the hierarchy isn't clear. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of new technologies in our field fit. There's a lot of new enabling technologies, there's remote technology, and for many people, the hierarchies aren't clear for that. Now, here in a little bit, I'm going to propose a hierarchy, and I think I can justify it, but it really depends on the quality and the design of the technology and what it's capable of doing.
So another way to say this might be that if a care method isn't clearly more or less intrusive than its alternative, then what you're saying, Mike, is that the voice and preference of the individual receiving the care should really drive the decision on which care method should be used. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah. And so, and I'll give you another example. If you really believe, and I think the evidence would show, and we'll get to that smaller settings for somebody that's semi-independent for sure is more enriching, has more possibility than a congregate setting.
I was going to say
and if that hierarchy is clear, I'll give you even a better one. It's better than an institution. An institution is a very intrusive option for somebody that really is pretty independent for sure. I think it's aversive for anybody, but we would absolutely have to say if somebody's pretty independent, being in an institution would be a really aversive, an intrusive option.
Absolutely.
Interestingly enough, you can't even, that person in most states can't even choose institutional care.
Right.
I mean, you can't get in, for example, a Kansas institution unless you have exceptional cause, and every other option has pretty much failed.
Right.
So that hierarchy absolutely exists, is that you can't get an institution without that. You can make the same case sometimes between living in an independent living program like the neighborhood network versus a group home, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Abby, did you say you have an example for this?
I do. I don't know if Mike wants me to save it for us to get further in. So for example, we have an individual, extremely independent, can drive a vehicle, goes to work, cooks their meals, all the above, but there is a skill deficit that could prevent them from living independently, and that is self-care. So the ability to know when to take a shower. They can take a shower on their own, but when to do it, and also when to brush their teeth. So those are the two pieces that would keep them from being in and as independent a setting as possible that they want to live in. So now they get the choice to decide, how do we want to be able to help support you with this? One, I could have traditional care where somebody comes over and is making sure I'm brushing my teeth or I'm getting into the shower. Or two, maybe there's another method where we can be prompted through our technology. And then they get a choice in the matter. And so someone can be in their own home, getting those prompts, and then also asking for in-person if wanted.
Love that.
And they're able to live independently because of it.
Love it.
Yeah. So and we're really going to get knee deep in that when we get into the hierarchies of care support that I think we should use. But
Right.
my point on this one is just literally to make the point that some hierarchies are very clear.
Right.
Institution, community. It starts to fuzz out a little bit, group home to semi-independent. But if somebody doesn't need to be in a group home and they have the skills to live in it, it kind of falls into it. Well, that would be less intrusive for them. And really, can you choose even life in a care facility if you can live outside of it? Maybe you can. But as those hierarchies get clear of what is more and less intrusive, there's pretty much an obligation on our part
Right.
to offer the things that are, at least on our part, to offer the things that are the least intrusive that can still meet their needs. We wouldn't have somebody live in a more controlling environment, in a less private, less outcomes, less self-direction, less on almost all those major areas.
Right.
If we could offer them something that was better for them on those outcomes, and they were able to do it, and we were able to support them in it. That's really it. But as that clouds up, then that personal choice does come in on that more, on that. But there is a point, I think, where they don't have it, like choosing institutional care or choosing a seriously congregate, program over one that is more close to what they need. So presenting, this is kind of the interesting thing, because this is why I'm going to introduce my father a little bit. He's no longer with us, but there's some examples here. But our choice, and where we fail, by the way, this is the biggest area of failure in our industry that has caused us the most problem and has had us get off the rails of trying to make progress toward those goals. And that is that making a meaningful choice requires understanding the choices and their relative impact on outcomes and quality. I'm going to talk a lot about one-sided choices here. It's so interesting. If we don't make options in the relative impact clear, then people we're not doing their job. And I see in our industry all the time somebody saying, well, would you like to have remote services or not? The or not is not really a choice. It's like, if you don't have remote services to meet your needs, what's the default? I mean, you're talking about, I would like to have remote services, but if you don't, then it's either you're going to have in-person services, or no services at all. So you can't just give a one-sided choice. It's not a meaningful choice. You have to present the default, and we don't commonly, compare remote support to in-person support. I rarely see that happen when they don't compare it to, like, well, okay, let's look at remote and in-home support, in-person support, and their impact on you living those and achieving those 6 outcomes. What's the impact, for example, of each of those on independence, on choice, self-direction, autonomy, access, personal safety, and privacy? Let's put the and privacy there too. Yeah. Because what if the in-person method had a greater impact on privacy than did the remote? Then why are we only talking about privacy on one side of the decision structure and not the other side? Let me give an example with my father. If I asked my father, and I put these up there, if I asked him, if he wanted someone in his home to provide care, he'd just, and that's all I said, or not. He said, no, I don't. But then what if the choice really was, would you like somebody in your home to provide care, or would you like to go to an assisted living facility to get care? Now that's a choice. And I can guarantee you, if he was alive still, he would say, I'd rather have the person in my home to provide care if that was my other alternative, right? Yeah. And by the way, not only that, having somebody in your home to provide care compared to assisted living probably would achieve those goals better than being in assisted living, because you don't get to choose when you eat. You don't. There's so much choices taken out of your lives, right?
Right. Yep.
But you may have safe. It may be safer. I mean, sometimes these options, like they may be more intrusive on some dimensions of those six, but they may actually deliver, better services on some others, and that's why they pick them, right?
Right.
So then, but then if I moved off that choice, I said, okay, Dad, would you rather have somebody in his home to help him, or would you rather leave going to assisted living? We did that one, but the next one would be, would you rather press a button for remote support help and then choose whether you want remote help or somebody to be dispatched to your home? Or would you rather have somebody in your home just sitting there waiting for you to have a need? My dad would pick choice one. And he would especially have picked it if he had to pay for it, because he would have to pay a lot more money over there. And so that to him would be very intrusive. So he had picked one. And then I said, okay, would you rather have a remote video visit with my doctor or nurse for a weekly follow-up care, or would you rather go to the clinic and get it directly at the clinic? Well, he'd pick, I'd rather do the remote one. So if you ask 100 people those things, and 99 out of 100 picked everything on the left that you see on the screen, everything the light blue, could you agree that we've just created a hierarchy?
Yeah.
100%. And all of choice two is this traditional way of doing things that people are kind of, I don't say stuck in, but they are. And choice one wasn't available for the longest time. Now choice one is.
Good point,
But
Dave.
but here's the thing: we don't do it that way. We don't actually do the least intrusive approach to care, and then we don't give them a choice between what we are offering
What the
and the
alternative
default
is.
that would be in place if they didn't do it. We just talk about the thing we're offering. We go up to that top thing. Would you like somebody in your home or not? And it's like, no, I don't want anybody in my home.
Would you like a camera in your home or not? No, I don't want a camera in
I
my
don't
home.
want a camera in my home. But if you said, would you like remote support, which requires you having something like that, and we'll talk about that later, or would you rather have somebody in your home, they would still pick the other. I say that all the time. Remember, Megan, I in the care industry that we're all in, how important I think it is. Like if people are wanting to remotely connect to GoodLife, like one of our employees, my cardinal rules is cameras on, right? If you want to be in a remote hybrid role and you're meeting with people, I want the cameras on, because we're in the human service business. And I say, hey, if you don't want to do that, just come on in and we'll meet in person. That's
Right.
cool. Well, 100% of the people picked, I'll just do it at home and I'll turn my camera on. So the hierarchy was created. It's like, you can come in,
Right.
or you can have it at home, but your camera's on. That was the choice. It wasn't, you could be at home and the camera's off. That wasn't the choice. But they still chose that as less intrusive than having to come in, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
there were reasons we did that, because we wanted it, we're in the human service business, and cares and our discussions are personal, and I want to make sure people feel like we're attending, and you can do that. And anytime, Megan, that I do remote training, it's free, but
We
you
want
gotta-
the
you
cameras
got-
on. The engagement.
we want to
the
we
personal
want the
interaction.
engagement, right?
Yeah.
So
well, and
anyway,
it's no burden on any of us, because we're able to choose that. We're able to say, yeah, this is the invasion of privacy that I'm willing to have in order to
Yeah.
contribute
and
right
it's
now.
less invasive than the
The
alternative.
Absolutely.
It's more private than the alternative.
Yep.
And we can
Well,
go into that later, but it's
and Mike,
absolutely all of those things.
Mike, you and I had talked earlier, and you brought up a really good analogy about having a meeting remotely and you being the boss. And do we want to do it to where I'm in my living room and I'm on my computer and you're at the office or whatever it might be, or do you just want to come to my house and do it? If you had that choice of love you to death, but if you came to my, you know what I mean? It's just if people were given the choice, they'd be like, well, I think I'll do this remotely. I got to clean up at the house. It's that choice that
Yeah.
everybody would choose to do something like that remotely.
Yeah. and actually I am going to use that analogy later, but
No,
I
I
want
think
to
it's
give it
actually
a
your
little
very
bit more
next
depth.
slide. I
Is
think
it?
yeah, I think it's next. It's
Yeah.
perfect transition.
So, part of this is I feel like we don't put ourselves, like we don't make decisions for people we support like we would make them for ourselves. And this is a big problem in our industry. It's like there's two standards. I mean, I laughed about this. You might as well. But I was involved with a care team, or even state regulars, by the way, who was having a meeting. They were actually having a remote meeting, cameras on, everybody was interacting with each other, about their ability of a person served to have a remote meeting with cameras, have a remote services with cameras. I mean, it is a national debate. But they're having this debate remotely with their cameras,
It
as
almost
if,
seems silly that it even, yeah.
I mean, when you kind of rise up 500 feet, it's like they're having a debate about having somebody have cameras, that would allow for them to get a remote service, and we will talk about this later, but the truth is, when you deliver in-home care in person, you have eyes, you have a mouth to speak, you have ears to listen, so you hear, you speak, you act, and you sense. I mean, you have all of those abilities in a home, right? Well, you need those same abilities to provide effective remote care, and we'll talk about that. But you need that, because if you don't have those same abilities, there's many, many, many needs that you won't be able to meet. And then that fundamentally causes problems. And I want to talk about a little bit more later, but like I asked this care team after having this discussion of they're having a remote discussion with their cameras on about whether a person could receive remote care with cameras. And I turned to them, and in fact, I tell you, I ask this at every conference I'm at, and they laugh. I asked the attendees, would you prefer a remote meeting with your boss or prefer your boss to constantly be in your home waiting for a need to meet? And they look at me and then they start laughing. It's like, well, I don't want my boss in my home. I wouldn't want that. Who would want that? And I said, but actually that is what's happening with care. It's like you're choosing between remote meeting with somebody and having somebody come into your home. That's just like a boss coming into your home. It's intrusive. Everybody knows it's intrusive.
Well, and it takes
And
that.
everybody should know it's more intrusive than the remote meeting, or people
Right, and
wouldn't
it's
do it.
usually like a one-time decision. You're asked once a year at a person-centered planning meeting. Do you want to have remote support, or would you rather have in-person support? And then that is
Crazy.
you don't get the organic choice you were talking about earlier. It doesn't take into account your ability to self-determine or have additional privacy or
Every
any of
need
that.
should be an organic choice.
Yeah.
Every
It
need
flows for all
should.
of
I mean, if it was Bewitched, it would be every need. Oh, come in, or no, let's do it remotely. But we have to agree that one would probably be more intrusive than the other. So it is the same analogy. There's no doubt about that. So the other thing that I'm going to focus on, and this happens in the care industry all the time, is what I call dismantling choices for remote support. And this is why I said, if you're going to deliver effective remote support, you need the same capabilities as if you're in a home. So, like in person, you have all these capabilities to see, hear, speak, listen, and act and sense with your, you can smell things, you can sense things, right? You can detect things. Well, you need those same things remotely, and that's where sensors and mics and cameras, all of those things are important in order to deliver effective remote care. Now, we'll talk about how those are designed later, but you need them in order to do that. I mean, would we really consider having a staff person in the home that had blindfolds on or earplugs or had their nose and ears and eyes, somehow plugged up, or just would not be able to see but would ever be able to talk. I mean, we would never do that. We never considered doing that, but we do it all the time for remote support. We literally have people sitting deciding, well, you can hear and speak, but there's no sensors and there's no ability to see. And they're making all these decisions while they're in a remote meeting where they have all those capabilities. It seems almost crazy that you can do it that way, but it's clear what they're doing is they're dismantling one choice that could meet those important care outcomes and even advance privacy, which we'll talk about. But they dismantle it to make it not functional, so it's no longer a choice. And now they don't compare it to the alternative, like we said before.
Right.
So they're saying, well, we can make this one less intrusive. Yes, but if it's no longer functional, what are they replacing it with when they can't use it?
Yeah.
What's the alternative?
In-person support.
Right. That's
Traditional care models.
or no support at all when they
Right.
need it, one or the other. And so it's like you can't look at this one-sided and say, I'm going to change all these things,
Right.
and not at least compare it to what would happen if it's no longer functional. Does that make sense? So it's super important. So I want to move now to a really important part of this. And I think that evidence, and you can feel it building, there's evidence that's starting to build to suggest that there's a hierarchy of intrusion related to support needs. And if we can demonstrate this, which I think we're about ready to, then the care industry should have an obligation to use the least intrusive one. And what's weird about it is you shouldn't be putting in limitations on things that's less intrusive than something that's more. You shouldn't be not comparing it to the default method. If you're looking at new approach, you shouldn't not. You have to compare it to what would be in place if it wasn't there. And if you do that fairly and you pick the new approach as less intrusive over and over and over again, pretty soon there's a hierarchy that exists. And I think that's where we are. So let's start comparing some support strategies. And there's some principles I want to talk to. I want to talk about 3 or 4 of them that I think we already have evidence for. Here's the first one. Remote assistive living and smart home methods of support appropriately designed, I'm going to say, and used are less intrusive and more private than traditional in-person care, presuming that the technologies can effectively address a given need. So if we can address a particular need, I think remote support is less intrusive than in-home support. I think it is.
Dramatically more. Yeah.
I think it's extremely obvious. So, but it's absolutely necessary to compare the remote support to what would be in place if it wasn't there. And if we do that, then the evidence-based hierarchy of intrusion will emerge, and you'll see it. So I want to compare some, kind of look into the remote support and talk about some things. So here's several examples of why I think that remote support is superior to in-home support if you can meet the same need. So there are needs that in-home support can meet that remote can't. By the way, there's needs that remote support can meet that in-home support can't. I mean, I can give you those examples. There's needs that technology can meet that in-home support can't meet. Carbon monoxide detection, night seizures, biometric measures. There's a ton of things that technologies can meet or detect that in-home support can't. So we'll get to that, but basically here's what I think: a well-designed system can advance independence, self-direction, personal safety, access, privacy, while minimizing intrusion much greater than in person. So that's my thesis. Here's some examples. With a camera, okay, You can digitally mask areas. Dave, you need to step in on all this. You can digitally mask areas that you want to keep private, right?
You
You
can, you
you
can, 100%. And the way I always look at it, I'll just say is that it was earlier, like I was saying, if you have a staff sitting on a couch and they look to the right and the bathroom door's open, they look right in it. I mean, they're going to see
right.
right through that door. But if you're using it remotely with a camera, that door's masked off. No one's ever remotely going to ever see that.
They could open that door and you can't see in.
Right.
With
There's privacy.
technology. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
and again, you have to have the right technology, but we do have the right technology.
correct.
So, but the reality, and it exists today. So, you can mask off areas you want to keep private. You can look at only the areas that you want to. You guys are all there. I can't see what's outside of your little square, right? Well, if I was in your home, I could, right? We would agree to that. You can change the background in what you do. You can do all kinds of things that protect your privacy and still show your image if you wanted to do that. Other things, though, is that you can customize alerts to filter out times with sensors. You can customize alerts to filter out times where something isn't a need and filter in a time when a need exists. For example, if somebody got out of bed and they walked to the bathroom, but they didn't come out of the bathroom, through sensor technology and software logic, you could say, oh, that person went in and they didn't come back out. Maybe we should send an alert out so somebody gets to check on them. But outside of that, if they just went to the bathroom and went back to bed, it wouldn't have an alert at all. Nobody would be, alerted. So in that
Now,
case,
is it more private doing it that way, or having somebody sitting on the couch all night watching somebody get a drink and go to the bathroom just in case,
yeah,
there's an
no,
issue.
of course, I mean, it's clear that it is. You can send alerts directly to the preferred or the right people too. I mean, with an in-home staff, in-present staff, you just can be alerted to that staff person. But with technology and software, you can send an alert if under some condition to a nurse or to a professional neighbor or to a parent or even to themselves, like a reminder, to do something. You left the stove on. It doesn't even have to be to somebody else. So which is able to advance independence, safety, and now privacy, right? Privacy too. So you can use sensors and software to trigger home automations, like you're walking in the hall at night, the lights turn on. You can do those kinds of things. Literally, there is technology where you can tap a phone and it could lock, it's NFC technology that it can actually do a smart home maneuver where it would lock a door, and the card could say good night, and you set the phone on it, and good night means that you lock the door and you turn all the lights out if you had a smart home that would do something like that.
And
All of that,
I was going to say to Abby's point earlier, with having that individual that they care for there, technology can keep a staff member from asking over and over and over
Exactly.
when somebody's losing their independence because you're asking them intrusively, have you bathed? Are you being, where technology can say, oh, well, this person obviously they've taken a shower or they've
yep.
bathed,
And it
and
feels
they're
self-directed and it protects dignity in a lot of ways too.
completely.
So you can have support. This is my bewitched part, and this is where I love it the most. Technology can begin when you want it to. You can self-direct it. You can hit a button, and now the support begins. You can get it from whom you want it, when you want it, where you want it, and when you're done getting it, it can go away. That sounds like Bewitched to me. That's like Samantha Stevens in Bewitched, twinkling her nose or snapping your fingers. It works the same way. In-home support doesn't work that way. It doesn't advance self-direction as much. In fact, there is a long-standing belief that people who work in homes, some of them, not all, but they care for people. They do for people. And it's hard to know, and Abby, you've been in the care world a long time. You know that, like, sometimes you have to kind of counsel a direct support staff to stop doing for people,
Correct.
especially when they didn't ask or want you to do it. It's very
Correct.
irritating when you do, when somebody's independent, wanting to be independent, and somebody's doing for them.
Correct.
But in technology that's self-directed by that individual, it wouldn't happen because they wouldn't ask for it.
Right. And then you
Right?
can identify care gaps in an organic way and
Yeah.
support them in their independence versus almost taking it away when you're there in person.
And we'll just go ahead, Dave.
I was just say with our system now, we literally have not even remotely kidding millions of data points a day that we take with all of these things. We only react to, like literally 99.9999% of them are nothing. They're not the thing that we would react on. We only react when there's something that, meets, the needs that of that individual. And it's so
And it's
not
of the
intrusive.
individual too. It's not just of the agency or of the support. It's of that person, which I love.
Yeah.
That's a big
And
piece.
we're going to be talking about our great software, but the reality is, sensors with software can filter out times when support isn't needed and can pinpoint times when they are, and that has to advance independence and safety and privacy more than the in-home presence of staff. But you wouldn't know that unless you compared it, and they
Right.
don't compare it. Again, they're federally required to do that, because if you don't compare it, how would you know which is more or less intrusive?
And it's crazy being in the field, the amount of examples that pop into my mind, just talking about this right now, it's just bam, 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 bam. It keeps coming. Every day these examples are happening for our individuals. I mean, it's an everyday thing.
And the people we serve, and we'll talk about the survey results down the road, but they are so proud of their independence and their ability to self-direct support, and their ability to control their lives, the services they get. It is so empowering to be able to do that. And if you were in their shoes, you would want that.
Exactly.
And it
That's-
is less intrusive.
That's our job, right? That's what gets
Should
really
be.
exciting, is not just the advocacy for it, but making that a reality, because it's a
Right.
Yeah.
dignity that we get to experience every day, and to extend that to anybody who has a barrier to independence. That's the
And it extends to their families and anybody involved with them when they get to see that. I mean, you're getting my passion ignited right now just
Me
talking
too.
about this. It's amazing, honestly.
But our passion is fueled by having clear goals, and
Yep.
those 6 things that we talk about repeatedly. Those, all
Absolutely.
those goals are absolutely beacons for us to just keep getting better.
absolutely.
But when you have something that's better, and somebody said, "Well, let's take away the cameras, let's take away this, let's take away that, let's take away the organic choice, let's put it in the PCP, let's only fund face to face." I mean, there's 1,000 things they could do that actually prohibits privacy and prohibits outcomes that are
Independence.
incredibly
Yep.
important to them, that have no basis to even exist if you follow the main principle that you're supposed to follow, which is do the least intrusive thing that can achieve the care expectations that you have. And if you just do that, you're going to be okay.
And that's something that guides us internally. Me being on the tech side of things, we get requests to solve things with technology all the time, and those values are the very first thing that we look at. Like, how is this going to fill in the blank? And it's kind of the core way that we look at that.
Yeah, yeah. So the power of technology to advance privacy and autonomy is incredible. I mean, I'm going to focus here a little bit on this one area with cameras, Dave, because this is a fun
Sure.
one. Because the truth is, and you know this, cameras aren't cameras anymore.
They are not.
They are not. In fact, they're really optical sensors. They are sensors. A camera doesn't even have to transmit an image whatsoever.
Exactly.
And I will tell you, a camera is used to advance privacy. Always at every conference, I tell everybody pick up their iPhone and then hold it to their neighbor and let them look at it and see if they can open it. And they can't. And then they turn around and look at it and it opens. Well, the camera is used as a privacy measure.
Safety, security, privacy, all those things.
And you know, cameras with software, you know, they can be used for facial recognition, but they don't have to transmit an image. And that's the optical sensor part of it. Let's say, you know, you wanted to give, Abby, you wanted to give a personal reminder to somebody, but you didn't want to give it to the wrong person.
Yep.
Well, your choice is you can be in the home virtually or in person and make sure that that happens. Or let's say somebody walks up to an intercom that has a optical sensor that doesn't transmit an image, but they know it's Mike. So now the software can say, oh, I see it's you, Mike. I'm going to give you a reminder today.
To feel that, to me,
Because
that feels
it
good.
knows
That's
it's you.
personable.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. So an optical sensor does not have to transmit an image, yet it is a camera. So if you have a policy in place that says we don't allow cameras in the home, well, guess what? Don't get a Rumba, because a Rumba has a camera. Don't, you know, there's several refrigerators now that do. There's Amazon Alexas that
Not to mention your
have
cell
cameras.
phone. It has
And
what,
by the
4
way, give me
cameras?
that cell phone because it's got 4 of them. You know, they all have cameras.
An
We have
iPad.
cameras. And I always laugh at. I always say, okay, you know, tell me about your iPhone. How many of you guys take that thing in the bathroom with you and just start, you know, surfing? Literally, you see a lot, like a few hands go up, and then 40, and then all of them eventually, you know, go up and they start laughing about it. But everybody, you know, basically is comfortable with their cameras.
It should be
Cameras-
a light bulb moment. I mean, there are
Right, right.
like there are cameras everywhere, and you already covered what surveillance means versus an invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
And the difference, and I love that you use this to sort of establish a baseline. It goes back to that organic choice. I get to choose when I'm picking up my phone and whether or not the camera is used, and I'm relying on the software that's built into that phone to make sure that my cameras aren't just on when I'm not willing to let them be on. So,
And by the way, as an agency, I've said this before, but it deserves to be said again. As an agency, GoodLife is in charge of protecting your privacy.
Exactly.
But Megan, you own it.
exactly.
You know, like I can go to my doctor and say I want all my medical records, and I can go put them out on a coffee table in a coffee shop if I want,
Absolutely.
because I own it.
Yep.
I am in charge of decisions of, like, you know, I go to the doctor and they have test results, and I sign the things that says, yeah, you can leave it on my cell phone, or you can call my wife and give the results to her. But they ask, you know, they're going to protect it, but I'm in charge of deciding what happens with it.
100%.
And those choices are important. And you know, I just want to champion the fact that we should give people the same choices that we have ourselves. And if we're trying to give people a normal and good life, that's our job.
Right.
Is to make sure that they have those same choices. But I want to make sure we impress. And Dave, you just amaze me every day on the technology that you are farming. And you know, we're working on crazy stuff. But you know, we have a camera that we're working with another sort of partnership where they're actually convert every person into a stick figure, right?
Yeah.
They're actually data points. It's like shows your hand moving, this like that. Now, you could see those videos, or you could choose to not see them. There could be just data points that's used that would determine if somebody has fallen, for example. So you can literally use. They're not even called cameras. They've been coy enough to call them they're optical sensors, but they are cameras. But they don't have to transmit an image, but they convert everybody to a stick figure so they can make data decisions about, like, is somebody moving? Are they ambulating? Are they dragging their feet? Are they falling? They can even look at whether people are drinking.
And they're the perfect. It's the perfect example of using an optical sensor. It doesn't have the ability to transmit video. It simply just doesn't do that. It is
No.
literally an optical sensor. I always think of like driving down the road and I forgot what it's called, lane minder or something on a car.
Hmm.
You've got an optical sensor. It's a camera. It's an optical sensor. It's making decisions based off of off of what it's seeing. But that's as far as it goes. Same thing with this. These are just data points that are
Yeah.
representations of somebody. That's it.
So I have to tell you my Rumba example because I wanted to make sure Rumbas had cameras. So I checked out, and of course they did have cameras. You call them optical sensors, but they were cameras. But to drive that point home, they're now preparing to offer a Sentry. They call it a Sentry security service. When you're gone, the Rumba takes off and it keeps looking in your house for intrusion. So your Rumba is now home security when you're gone. Isn't that funny? So, cameras are all over. Cameras are literally all over. We use them every day.
Yeah.
So having any kind of thing where we'd say no cameras, is ridiculous. And even no cameras for remote support is different. And even saying something like, well, you can only have normal cameras. So like an iPhone, you can take it in the bathroom and you can take it in the bedroom. That's an invasion of privacy. Or you can have a stationary one where you can digitally mark out all areas of the home you don't want to see except for what you do, and you can be turned on and off by the customer. So for remote support, which one's more private? It's very clear which one's more private. It's not the iPhone, but an iPhone's normal, so they should have that right, just like everybody else does. So all of these things, the power of advanced technology, including cameras, are superior and more private than what my point on all of this is. In-home staff could do none of these customizations. You can't turn their video off. You can't turn their memory off. You can't turn what they hear on or off. You can customize all of this to engage in it when they want, where they want, for as long as they want, and see only what they see, hear only what they hear. You can make these as private, or you can make them not seen at all, and they're just doing alerts. Literally, there is technology emerging where they're using thermal images, not as an image, but as a sensor to know when somebody's incontinent at night. Now, they may say, oh, well, God, isn't that an invasion of privacy? And so, well, okay, well, what's the alternative? Well,
Right.
the alternative is somebody going in every hour, opening their sheets and maybe feeling to see if it's wet. You tell me which is more private. One where you don't see anything, you just get a text saying, Fred's incontinent. Or you check on them every hour, and it's a human being that sees whatever they see. I know what most people would pick. So intrusion and cameras, you cannot say no cameras if you believe in advancing care. And if we already agree that if you have an in-home staff that has all those capabilities and remote staff that has the same capabilities, he or she, they're both the same. I'm absolutely telling you that remote support is still less intrusive with all of those capabilities, because the in-home staff, could smoke and smell like smoke. They're in your space. They're consuming your couch. They're watching your TV. They may have a show they would rather watch than what you watch. They may be on the phone. There's so many things that they consume and occupy that you don't do remotely. And you can turn them on. You can turn them off. You can self-direct them. So all of that. A couple more things in terms of intrusiveness. I want to say that self-directed detecting needs yourself is less intrusive than sensor detecting needs. I will say that. Like, Megan, if you didn't need any sensor, if you had a need that you could detect yourself and then ask for help, that's the least intrusive on your on your independence. You are saying, "Oh, I don't feel the. I'm going to call the nurse." That's you recognize the need and you're asking for help.
I'm a perfect example for this because people tell me all the time that I'm very self-aware. So I definitely can detect my own needs.
Well, and there's lots of needs that you can detect, but you would admit that you would like to rely on a smoke detector for a fire, wouldn't you?
Correct.
As opposed to maybe a staff that you don't know that's just sitting there waiting for that,
Waiting for the fire
or
to stop.
carbon monoxide. You wouldn't know if that.
Correct. That's something
And if you fell and you were incapacitated to ask for help,
right.
you might want a sensor or somebody checking on you periodically,
Yes, a
right?
backup plan is always a good plan.
Or a fall sensor.
Right.
So sensor software detected needs are those needs that a software combined with the sensor can detect a need. That's like you go into the bathroom but you don't come out. Well, logic has to say, well, for how long are
Right.
they in there? 5 minutes, no, 10, 15, 20. Sometime you'll say, oh, that's long enough. But
Somebody come check on me. Yeah.
my tolerance and Dave's tolerance may be, he may want to be on the floor longer than me. I may say, hey, if I don't come out in 10 minutes, check on me. And Dave may say, I'll give me an hour.
I mean, I like taking long showers, so
Right. So those kinds of things. But one of the things I want to point out, because it happens all across the country, if you use sensors and you don't have software, then it goes off like popcorn. And Dave, you were mentioning this. We have literally 1 million that we go off a day,
right.
but we only have to respond to a very, a very small subset of those that software detects is an issue. Like, how many times, Abby, does the door open and close a day?
Right.
But it's outlandish times, that you would do that. And if you only had a sensor go off every time that happened, you would have to call or check in on somebody every time that sensor went off, and they don't need it.
That would drive them crazy. Just like it would me.
It would be really intrusive, right? Not as intrusive as somebody being in their home,
Right.
sitting there doing it, but more intrusive than is necessary if you
Well,
have
and
software
Mike, you
to say,
mentioned, I was just going to say, there's another point there that you mentioned earlier about staff sustainability and scalability. And
Yeah.
even if every single sensor had to be, even if you had like a remote support team and every single sensor had to be addressed, you're staffing more people at the remote support center than you would. I mean, it's untenable.
well,
It's,
I'm not going to say the state because they'd be embarrassed, but like a neighboring state of ours has a rule that you can only support 12 people remotely. Like, where did they come up with that number?
Right.
And it's because they don't have software. They look at every sensor. It pops up like popcorn, and actually the people themselves are the software. They are monitoring every one of those pops of
we can
sensors.
afford to do that.
Well, not only can afford, you're surveilling all of those,
Yeah.
and you're making decisions about that. If you were in the home, you would be surveilling it's just like being in the home is surveilling their needs.
Right.
If you had software that filtered out 95% of those as not necessary, like I'm only interested in doors that open after 10 o'clock at night and 6 in the morning, because they have a person who may have an elopement, concern that we want to make sure that we are notified that they're leaving or something like that.
Right.
Or we don't want somebody taking a shower after 10 because that person has seizures, and if he falls in the shower, it could be a really big problem. And you know where that problem came, because we had an issue like that one time where somebody did that. And so we invented a sensor for a shower that notified us under certain software logic conditions that somebody was taking the shower too long, or they were taking it at the wrong time, or the temperature was too hot. I mean, there's so many different variants. So you say, well, if it's too hot, yeah, if it's 120 degrees, I want to know that, because that's a problem. If it's on for an hour and a half, I would consider maybe there could be something wrong that we want to check.
Well,
But
even
there's so many issues that software logic can do that would be that would be better than a caregiver sitting there, or even a remote caregiver watching all the popcorn go off, right? So the hierarchy I'm talking about here is self-directed needs, self-detected needs are the least intrusive, sensor software detected needs are next. And then caregiver detected needs fall dead last. But I will say that even caregiver detected needs, I'll give the nod to remote caregiver, remote supervision would be better than in-home supervision from a privacy intrusion perspective. So I'm saying you can create a hierarchy here, just like I did on the other things, that will be helpful in deciding which is the least intrusive approach. So we've kind of gone through this already about unfiltered versus filtered software, caregiver detected needs, and organic choice making. You know, we've also kind of discussed organic choice making versus I call it a priority. One time in a person-centered support plan, we say we want it done this way and not this way. That's not how we make decisions. We do it organically. So organic choice is less intrusive than what I call a priority or one and done choices, right? The only time you use a one and done choice is if they don't have the ability to self-direct organically, or the choice is so powerful to them that they'll just say, I don't care, you know, I always feel this way.
What about if
That's how they
somebody?
felt.
What about if somebody's, I guess, choice is delegated to a guardian or an advocate? Would that be the?
You know, there's been a lot of discussion about this. And a national opinion has really pivoted on this, and I support the way it's going. But I feel that many people have guardians appointed, and you know, the guardian laws are more state specific, so some are stronger than others. But I would tell you that guardians have the same requirements that we have or other people have or the client does, is to make decisions on behalf of the client who can't make that decision. So if they can make the decision, reasonably so, they should not do it. But they would make decisions on behalf of it, but they should make decisions that also are trying to advance those. You know, a guardian should be making decisions that deliver effective care in ways that advance those primary outcomes of care as well. That they should do that.
Yeah.
You know, and so whether you have a guardian or not, those outcomes are still important, and your job is still to advance them and to use the least intrusive approach to care that's necessary to do that. So, you know, we have to educate guardians a lot on that, and we have to educate them on which care can work and be less intrusive. But, you know, what I've learned about guardians is they're driven by one of those outcomes that I just talked about. It could be safety. It could be getting access to the right care. You know, most people end up in congregate care simply because they can't get access to that care they get in the congregate setting in the community. You know me, I've actually helped close 6 institutions, and all the families would say, you know, well, where are they going to get the nursing support or the behavioral support or this? You know, the community programs may not have access to that, or they don't have it in the home where they need it.
Right.
And so access is super important, and it's really important because technology can give people access. Because I'm about ready to go to the next one. You just nailed it on this one. And the next level of intrusion scale is about the setting size. So the point I want to make on setting size is this. The size of the setting can advance many goals. It can advance independence. It can advance self-direction. It can advance privacy, right? It can do that. However, as the setting size gets smaller, some things get very difficult to deliver, especially people who have complex care needs. For example, housing gets more expensive, especially for people who are needing accessible housing. It's very expensive. Transportation is more expensive. Community resources and Abby, you know, just the logistics of getting people, places and supporting people is toward smaller settings require more staffing and regular staffing, and there's a lot of turbulence. Like if you only have one staff working alone to help people, every turnover is like 100% turnover in their knowledge of that person, right? In a larger setting, you might have a turnover, but somebody's still there that knows the client, so they can mentor the new person. Those things don't happen as much in smaller settings, and there aren't many backups for staffing when somebody doesn't show up at a home. The neighborhood network's different. We'll talk about that. But normal in-home care, if somebody doesn't show up, they're kind of dead in the water. They don't have anybody, and you might have a care gap. And if that person can't have a care gap because of a complex need, then they don't have access to live in that care environment, that small environment. So they have to go to a congregate care because we didn't solve that problem for them. Well, I can just tell you that the setting matters, but technology can be used to solve literally all of those problems. And so the next generation of best practice support is made possible by technology. And so to talk about it from now on, I'm going to go into the neighborhood network, and I think I'm going to use that as another podcast. But what I want to really end by saying, and I kind of want to summarize like what we've accomplished. What I hope we've accomplished in this podcast is we've said that here are the clear goals that we're trying to achieve to deliver best practice care to help people live as much as possible their good life. That's the goal, right? Yep. That's the overriding goal. We need to deliver care to help people achieve certain goals. And privacy is definitely one, but independence, self-direction. I'm not going to keep going through them, but I want to hammer it home that there's goals that we have to deliver, right, to help people live that good life. And privacy is one of them, but it's not the only one. And every care approach is intrusive on people's privacy. Our job, once again, in summary, is to use the least intrusive, potentially appropriate approach for care that can achieve those outcomes the best. That requires comparing what approach we're going to use with the default that would exist if they didn't have it. And if we don't make that comparison, we haven't done our job. And in our case, it's usually we're comparing remote support to in-home support or no support when it's needed, right?
Right.
For people who get fractional care.
Good point.
And Megan, we remember we worked in Alaska and all these places, Arkansas. When I talk about fractional care, I'm talking about somebody have a need for 5 hours of care or 20 hours of care a week or 30 hours of care a week or 2 hours here and 5 hours there. But the reality is traditional care just schedules time there, and they schedule time when they think a care need exists.
Yep.
But they don't really know because most care is intermittent and unpredictable, and needs happen when they happen. You can't decide somebody's going to have a crisis. You can only be there when they do, but you don't know when it's going to happen. Or they may have a care need. They may feel like they don't remember something, or they are confused about something. You need something to ebb and flow just like Bewitched.
Yep.
You just need it to work like that. And that should be the goal. And if it is the goal and you can do it, it's going to beat traditional in-home care every time. But you got to compare it.
100%.
And so anytime somebody's going to ask you, and this kind of my parting shot is if anybody's going to ask you, like, should you have cameras in the home? And this is what are you using them for? Is the question, really. Well, remote support, should they have? So the real question is, should somebody who provides remote support have the ability to see, hear, talk, and have all the same capabilities of in-home support? And the answer is, well, for many needs, they're going to need that. And should it be designed in a way that you can turn it on into the customer can turn it on and off and choose when to have it? Well, yeah, if you do all of that, that's just like you're doing right now. It's organic. It allows remote support, and if you can make it work like Bewitched, comparing that to fractional care where somebody is just scheduled to show up at some particular time that you have available, when the need may not even be then. I always say, if Uber did care or it did rides like we do care, they would hire a driver, for everybody that needs a ride, and they'd sit out in their driveway until they had a need, right?
Right.
Or they would show up when you didn't need a ride.
Right.
The real way we have to design services is to design it to be like Bewitched, have organic consent to meet those goals. And if we do, it should be less intrusive than everything else, and it should be picked. And you shouldn't dismantle it. You shouldn't do anything that would prevent it from being picked beyond something that would be more intrusive.
I think by automatically negating it to, like you said, it does remove that choice and independence right off the bat. It just right away, it's not even on the table for some odd reason, but it's. And Megan, tonight, you've got to go home, pick up a 13-inch black and white TV, maybe find Bewitched on VHS, and watch a few seasons of it. Yes.
We'll do.
Yeah, maybe it should just be required watching for anybody that needs to learn how the support should be delivered. Getting ready for the next podcast, I just want to say that the next time we get together, we're going to talk about the neighborhood network service model, and that it was designed from the ground up to deliver and advance those goals we talked about in this episode. But we're going to kind of show you how it was designed to advance each of those goals, and we're going to show how that was less intrusive than the traditional approach to care. So that's what we're going to do. And then following that, we're going to talk about regulatory and licensing and other things that could limit like our growth to, improving people's lives, and what we need to do instead on those practices so that we fuel forward to the next generation of care.
This was quite possibly our most consequential episode so far. And I have to say a few words in conclusion. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is help everyone become the chief executive officer of their own self, to make them the executive director of their faculties, of their decisions, of their life. And this kind of self-direction and independence is achievable. It's achievable now, especially now. And every industry is impacted by progress. Every industry, every field, including ours. Like Mike said, we used to address heart problems with bloodletting, with leeches. Then we used herbal remedies. Then we had surgery. Then we had angioplasty. Tomorrow, they're working now on nanotechnology that's even less intrusive. Another example is this following question: where are you now? And I'm asking the listener: are you on the treadmill? Are you driving your car? Are you doing chores? That's right, you're listening to a podcast. It used to be the radio. You had to wait at a certain hour. You couldn't choose your content. Now you choose content that's important to you. And you choose, you can download it on your phone, on your device, and you can listen to it anytime you want. You said something, David. We used to gather around the black and white 14-inch TV set in the family room. We had to adjust the antenna, Megan and Abby, so we can catch ABC at 8 p.m. on a Thursday to watch Bewitched. Well, guess what? That's not the case anymore. Things have changed. Not so long ago, safety and privacy if not mutually exclusive, were mutually compromising. Every time you increase safety, you decrease privacy. Every time you increase privacy, you decrease safety. Well, times have changed. And, quarter of a century has passed since the year 2000. And times have really changed. Technology has changed. Yes, you can make a choice to stay behind, to not catch up with time. But then your services, they'll become archaic, they'll become anachronistic, they'll become stagnant. And this is not what we want. We want to keep up with the times because we believe that the people we serve, they deserve to live now, not in the past. So today we navigated once again through the privacy paradox and much more. And we hope that after listening to this episode, you will become at least a little bit bewitched. Today you were on yet another quest for the good life with Dr. Mike Strouse, Megan McKinney Todd, David McDonald, Abby Baden, and Samantha, the Good Witch. This episode was produced by Alex Escalante. Everything else was my fault. Until next time, this was the quest for good life.